Hello and welcome to the Rippling Pages. This is the podcast where we have a coffee with the world's most interesting writers to inspire your reading and your writing. And it's all crafted and curated by me, Liam Bishop. Now, living a humdrum life in Kentucky, Emmett spends his days packing boxes in a warehouse. But what happens when he begins to dream of another life? And when those dreams start to fracture his family relationships? These are the questions at the heart of Fulfilment, Lee Cole's second novel. The book follows two half brothers whose clashing ambitions, Emmett's longing to be a screenwriter, and his brother's academic ideals about rural despair, go beyond a simple difference in worldview. Something deeper threatens to pull them apart. Lee himself is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, and he is also the author of Groundskeeping. Both his novels were published by Faber in the UK, and the New York Times has described his work as Ann Tyler by way of Sally Rooney. What quite the compliment. Originally from Kentucky, Lee joins me from Philadelphia. Lee, delighted to have you on the Ripping Pages. Thanks so much for being here.
No, thanks for so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Ann Tyler and Sally Rooney. How did you feel when you saw that quotation on the front of your first book?
Yeah, I mean it's great company to be in. Yeah, I love both of those writers, and was really just proud of the comparison.
I guess Ann Tyler writes about family in America, and Sally Rooney, the Irish writer, and she writes kind of about young people with literary ideals to some extent.
Hmm.
Knowing Sally Rooney is she's quite openly political as well and about Marxism, and I'm not sure Ann Tyler is, but interestingly that you've got these two characters in this novel who have certain ideals, I guess you might say.
Yeah, I'm a big Rooney fan. I think she can be somewhat polarizing. I mean, I know
Mm,
people have a lot of my writer friends have strong opinions one way or the other, but I'm a fan. And I just appreciate that she writes about class. She's one of the few kind of contemporary writers who I foregrounds class and treats it as this kind of organizing principle in society. From which so many of our social interactions flow and are influenced by. And
yeah.
I just appreciate that about her work.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, would you say it's class that intersects your work one way or another?
I don't know. I mean, it's tricky because I'm not writing political treatises or something. I'm not making kind of political arguments in my novels, and I think that I do have political interests, and I have worldview, right? Any writer does, and sort of ideas about why people living in a certain place with certain material conditions, you know, interact the way that they do and have kind of the foibles that they do and the failings that they do and the hopes and expectations that they have. All of that is influenced by class and by sort of the material reality of where a person lives, where they're coming from. And I think American fiction, I'm not sure about contemporary sort of British literature compared to contemporary American literature, but I know it historically, British fiction has been more preoccupied with class, I think, whereas maybe American fiction has been more preoccupied with other kind of identity markers, whether it's race or gender or something like that. And it's always been a little strange to me that American writers sort of shy away from it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just why I was curious, just because you mentioned the word actually, and it isn't the word that I see often in American fiction, and it is something I associate, I guess, with British fiction. But it's interesting that, yeah, and your books are about people on different levels of society, we might call it, to talk a little bit less in a political way, maybe. But why don't we start with talking about, or why don't we get into what your book is about?
Hmm.
Fulfillment. Just before we do, I'd just like to remind everyone to like, share, review the show, tell your friends about the Rippling Pages. But yeah, why do we get into it, Liam? Let's talk about fulfillment. And I would like to I'm not going to start with a character actually, maybe just related to what we've spoken about. I'd quite like to start by talking about Kentucky, if you don't mind. It's a setting of both your novels. But I don't know if you can just tell us a little bit about where Emmett and Joel live, and why it is Kentucky that you've chosen to set your novels there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm well, I mean, I guess the main thing is that I'm from Kentucky and it's a place that I feel like I know well. And when I sit down to write, That's just sort of my default position or something. I start writing and it's usually something set in Kentucky. And I mean, lately I've started to think like, maybe I should try other things as far as setting because it's been 10 years since I've lived there. Um, but in general, it's just a place that I feel like I know really well. I know the vernacular, I know the way people talk, and I know the kind of anxieties that are there that I can kind of mine for tension or conflict between characters. But what's interesting to me, I think about whenever I go home now, and I think this relates to the Joel and Emmett in Fulfilment, is that there tend to be kind of two groups of people who grow up in these kind of rural small town places. The people who stay and the people who leave, right? To sort of make it in life, to do something more with your life, it's hard to stay and do that, right? A lot of people growing up in these places, their goal is to get out. And I noticed that a lot. I've noticed that a lot with, people that I knew as a kid, where one sibling will maybe go off and get a college degree, and move to a city or something. And another sibling will have issues or trouble, they'll get mixed up with drugs or something. Um, and that was always so kind of mysterious to me because it's like, well, these two siblings came from the same basic, origin, right? They both grew up in the same house. They had the same parents. Um, so how did they take such divergent routes in life?
So Joel's the academic, and Emmett is working in a packaging warehouse. Are
Hmm.
these two people that you would identify with some of the people that you, not that they're based necessarily on real characters, but are these some of the people that are stricken by these issues or that are affected by these issues that you just articulated?
I think so. I mean, Emmett is kind of failed to launch in a lot of ways. He has these, what you might call naive ideas about kind of making it in Hollywood. And uh, when the novel begins, there's some suggestion that he's tried several sort of creative careers or endeavors and that they haven't really gone anywhere. And he's returning to Kentucky to take this job at a kind of shipping warehouse, and to work on a screenplay because this is the next thing. He's gonna write a screenplay. He's gonna make it big in Hollywood, right? I mean, I think he recognizes on some level. That this is kind of a stereotype or how many people get off Greyhound buses every day and on Hollywood Boulevard thinking that exact thing, that they're gonna make it big. And then Joel is an academic who's published a book, and lives in New York. And he has all of these, as they say in Kentucky, highfalutin theories about rural despair, and he fancies himself a Marxist, and his relationship to his home and to where he came from has become very theoretical in a way, and abstracted away from sort of concrete reality, and he in Emmett's eyes has succeeded. He's gotten out. He's made a career as this academic and this writer. And when we first meet them, I think there's at least in from Emmett's point of view, there's a lot of resentment and just wishing that he could have what his half brother has.
Is that in wishing what he could have in terms of life or intellectual?
I think I think it's a little of both. I mean, I think that Emmett is broke for one thing. I mean, he's kind of taking this job because he has to, and because these kinds of like shipping warehouse jobs are becoming increasingly more prevalent in rural places, and so this is one of a few options that he has. Yeah, I think it's also a sense of meaning or importance or feeling like you're doing something big. I mean, at one point, the Homer, there's a line from Homer quoted at the kitchen table. I think Joel is the one who quotes it. It's, let me not then die ingloriously, but let me first do some great thing that shall be told among men hereafter, right? I think that that's very much his mindset. Like he wants his life to be big. He wants to make a big splash, and he sees Joel is someone who's maybe doing that. And then Joel, from his perspective, is like, well, look, I'm writing about critical theory, publishing these little academic books. Like nobody knows who I am. So maybe you don't actually want this. But yeah, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding between them and a lot of resentment. And from Emmett's perspective, just sort of wishing he could reach that level that Joel was at.
I don't think this is Emmett that says it, but you describe it as his, or does Joel refer to himself as a Southern fried rendition of Marx?
Yeah, he's sort of it's when Joel meets Alice, who's sort of the third principal character. And he at some point he gives what she describes as the Gospel of Marx, or at least his Southern fried rendition of it. He has really strong political convictions and ideas about the South and about his home that can come across as somewhat condescending to Emmett, his brother.
But I wonder if we could just speak about the packaging warehouse.
Hmm.
I just find it absolutely fascinating. And I don't know why that is, but I think, well, obviously it's the way that you write about it. And the characters, and we've got Caleb, and I'd like to speak about Caleb as well, but just tell me about the choice to go for what you describe as the Tempo's largest distribution hub built in Nowheresville, Kentucky.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of it was that I worked in a UPS warehouse for 3 years in Louisville, Kentucky. And I worked nights, and it was a really strange and interesting job. I and people were always telling me at the time that I should try to write about it because there's just, a weird like jargon there. The idea of the 8 rules of lifting and lowering comes up a lot, which was a little, dystopian, but based on a real
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
I was reluctant to write about it for a while because the job itself was pretty boring and I had to live it. And I was like, I don't want to have to live it again by writing about it, and I had trouble sort of conceptualizing a way to make the work interesting. Because really at a basic level, it's just sort of putting boxes onto a conveyor belt, right? And that's what Emmett is doing night after night. Um, and I think eventually I sort of seized on this idea of a crime or almost like a heist narrative arc in the warehouse. And without giving too much away, I mean, Emmett sort of teams up with this other sort of ne'er-do-well character named Caleb to steal something that's coming through the warehouse, right? And I had heard about this happening, and I'm sure this planted the seed back in the day. But I can remember working at this warehouse and hearing stories about people who had stolen packages and gotten caught. There was one story, I have no idea whether this was true, but that a woman was stealing cash that was being sent through the warehouse, and the company that was sending the cash figured it out, and they put a dye pack in the bag so that when she opened it in the bathroom, this paint like dye sprayed out, and of course she was caught, obviously. But writing about the two brothers and the betrayal between them also kind of added some plot or narrative that I felt like gave it shape. And um I don't know. I mean, it was a weird place. Like you get all kinds of strange packages coming through. A lot of the, things that I mentioned in the book really did, come through the warehouse. We would get, whole containers full of like human blood and styrofoam coolers and tissue samples, and then, you'd get cans that had huge tractor tires from the John Deere plant, or axles, and
Wow.
crickets, and just you name it, just all kinds of weird live reptiles, just like weird stuff that was coming through overnight kind of shipping. And so, yeah, I'm glad that I found a way into the material. I think that's for writers sometimes, if you're basing something on life experience, um, to make it interesting for yourself, to make it engaging to yourself as an artist, you almost have to find some other kind of dimension or some other angle to sort of look at it from. And I think for me, that was sort of the crime narrative.
That's really interesting. I mean, I've never worked in a packaging warehouse. My dad does actually at the moment in a
Really.
kind of semi-retirement. And but I've had jobs that are, yeah, what we I don't know what, I don't want to call them meaningless because I don't think they are really meaningless. But I've been on the, yeah, lower end of the chain, I guess, so to speak. Why do you think people are driven to commit these crimes within these situations?
Well, I mean, I think sort of the straightforward answer, I guess, is just that they're desperate in some way, and need money. And I mean, interestingly, like, when when you went into really busy seasons, like before Christmas, for example, which we called peak season, which was just an insane time. I mean, if you ever need to be cured of like your Christmas spirit, just go work in a packaging warehouse in the few weeks before Christmas, and you will come away hating all things Christmas, because it's just like just this avalanche, just endless, sort of relentless flow of packages that are coming through. But during that period, they hire a lot of temp workers and sort of relax some of the hiring, standards. And I remember, yeah, some of those people, were in kind of dire straits in life, and they took this job because it was one of the few, possibilities for them. And that's, I think, true of a lot of these kind of warehouse jobs. Not always. I mean, there were also people there who had worked, for a long time, who were older, who had union seniority, and people who did it part time. Like, it's not always the case that everyone I worked with was in some kind of desperate situation. But I think, and a lot of warehouses are built in areas where some other industry has fled, right? And it's kind of often a poor substitute. I mean, in a lot of these places, it's like choosing between that and like McDonald's or something, like a service industry job, because a lot of the manufacturing, at least where I'm from, a lot of the manufacturing jobs have left. They've been outsourced or automated or whatever.
I've just found it interesting because of what you were saying about Kentucky and people that you know there and the lives that people live. So, setting a novel in Kentucky, I'm just really curious about it. It just sounds a really fascinating
It
place.
is. Yeah. I mean, but it's also a beautiful place. Like, I don't
Yeah.
I don't mean to suggest that it's like you go there and it's like a post-apocalyptic wasteland
No,
or
no, no.
something. It's really beautiful. And I think one of Joel's kind of faults maybe is that his mother Kathy and Emmett sort of point this out at a couple of points, that he's sort of intent on seeing it in a pessimistic light or in a bleak light. And I think that a lot of these social problems that I'm talking about are much more insidious than that. It's not like so obvious when you go to these places that they're blighted, or that
No.
there are these major problems. I mean, a lot of it's underneath the surface.
Yeah, maybe then just thinking about reading the novel, then it's easier to see now, I guess, why Emmett might be like he is.
Hmm.
But is there a lineage? You can see, I think there's a lineage that we've traced there from Emmett's circumstances and his background and his childhood, where he is now. But what's the lineage then for someone like Joel? Has his background influenced his circumstances and his world, this very specific ideology and worldview?
Yeah, I mean, I I sometimes wonder if you're born in kind of a small town or a rural place, you're either going to um, define yourself in accordance with that or in opposition to it. Which is maybe the case too with just like your family or any sort of part of your background. It's like you either kind of identify with it or you identify against it, but either way, it's sort of the thing that you're orienting yourself around, right? Um, and I don't know. I mean, for people who want to get out, who want to leave small town America, like there are just a lot of different ideas of, about what that escape might be or what it might look like. For some people, it's going to college. For some people, it's pursuing some sort of artistic career. That's sort of what Emmett has in mind. Um, and for Joel, I think it was kind of going to college, getting this degree, thinking of himself as an intellectual, sort of getting the validation that comes with that. Yeah, maybe exploiting where he came from, or at least mining it for kind of material to sort of theorize about, in his work as a kind of critical theorist. And I think he feels guilty about that sometimes. And I'm sure in some way I was sort of writing about myself and my own feelings of guilt about sort of writing where I'm writing about where I'm from and sort of the ethics of that. I mean, writers I think are always having to wrestle with where their material comes from and whether they have a right to that material.
Yeah, and I mean, you say it, don't you? Don't you, in your opening lines of your first novel? The
Sure.
idea of
Yeah.
very much this idea of homecoming and what is home. Um,
No, I know. If you mean the first line, it's just, that I've always had the same predicament that when I'm
yeah,
home
yeah,
in
yeah.
Kentucky, I want only to leave, and when I'm away, I'm homesick, right?
For a
Um,
place that never was, though. So I think that's
yeah.
interesting as well. The place, and it just makes you wonder. What is this idea of? And I'm asking. I'm sort of honing in on it just because I'm really fascinated by it. And perhaps I'm also projecting a little bit because I find it interesting writing about home and places that you grow up in and you think and then actually when do you really know a place? And
Right.
well, I'll tell you what we might do, Lee. We'll have a quick break on the Rippling Pages. Do come back. We'll talk more about fulfillment. Did you know, Lee? Well, I suspect you didn't know, but you will now that there is a Rippling Pages bookshop, and on there are all the books of Rippling Pages guests. That will include yours. And the best bit about the bookshop, it's online, so you don't have to travel there. And it's all hosted on bookshop.org.uk, and all the books that come from that bookshop are provided by indie bookshops. So if you buy from there, you support the podcast, you support the writer, and you support indie bookshops. So can't say fairer than that, can we? So yeah, if you enjoyed today's
Great.
episode, why not get on there and have a look and pick up a copy of Fulfillment? Okay, let's get back into it. This is Lee Cole talking about Fulfillment. Welcome back to the Ripping Pages. I'm here with Lee Cole talking about Fulfillment. So yeah, well, let's talk about Alice. And you described her as a third principal character, and she does play a very pivotal role, doesn't she,
Hmm.
in the book and in the lives of Emmett and Joel. Can you just talk a little bit about her?
She's Joel's wife. They have a pretty young marriage. They've only been married a few years. And she's pretty when we meet them at the beginning of the novel, she's pretty unhappy in the relationship. I mean, all three of these characters are searching for, some kind of fulfillment in life. And I think for her, it's that she kind of wants to go off grid and have a small farm, right? She wants to kind of escape from modern life and grow vegetables and live in the country. And I think, there's a long sort of chapter in the middle of the book that describes her meeting Joel and sort of how their relationship begins. And I think that's initially kind of what draws them to each other is that they both have this skepticism about modern life, right? And they both, I mean, for Joel though, it's a very different solution, right? His idea is to kind of that we need Marxism or maybe Southern fried Marxism. And she is much more interested, I think, in environmental issues. I mean, she sort of abandons a philosophy PhD to go live with Joel in New York. And she was sort of focusing on environmental ethics. She's reading Wendell Berry and Aldo Leopold and all these kind of great environmental writers, and that's her dream. She wants to have this small farm and she wants to make it happen, and she's beginning to realize, I think, at the beginning of the novel that that is going to require probably ending the relationship with Joel and ending the marriage. And so she's trying to figure out a kind of way to do that.
She don't really get a fair crack, does she? I don't think in terms of the life and I guess for me, I felt for all of the characters in a different way, but I felt for Alice, and I guess her vision is. I mean, what is this vision then of a farm? Is it something? Doesn't it? You've been talking about Kentucky and where it's going to come from. Is it an idea related to that? Or is it an idea of a peaceful life? There's so much conflict going on here. There's so much unconscious kind of anger and frustration, and the characters
Mhm.
don't really know where they're driving it and putting it. Is that a fantasy of a more peaceful life? Or is it just
Mhm.
purely what it is that she wants?
Well, I think for all the characters, maybe there is this distance between fantasy and reality, right? So for Emmett, for example, he has a kind of fantasy of making it in Hollywood, right? Which is not an uncommon fantasy. A lot of people want that or have some idea about what that looks like. And then they go to LA and the reality is very different, right? And I think that it's similar with Alice, right? Like it's very easy to read kind of the canonical books in environmental essay writing, to read Annie Dillard or to read Wendell Berry or something, and to fantasize about a life that's more in harmony with nature and closer to nature. It's my grandparents' generation. They had a small farm and lived some version of the life I think that Alice longs to have. Um, and there's still evidence of it around. You still see the remainder of that way of living. Um, and there's something kind of elegiac about that or nostalgic about it for me whenever I go home, and something a little sad to sort of see it go away and be replaced with like I don't know, like fast food chain restaurants or something. Like I think by the end of the book, she has a more realistic idea of what this kind of life would require. She's not totally kind of living in a fantasy about it. And I think of all the characters, she sort of comes the closest by the end to reaching her aims, right? To reaching her idea of what sort of fulfillment looks like.
Yeah, it's the way that Emmett and Joel sort of communicate with her and about her. She is on some level a what she represents to them is not real,
Hmm.
and especially for Emmett, I think. But I guess it's that sense of how do they reach fulfillment, and does this idea then of fulfillment relate to an idea of what is real?
There's so much in our culture or in American culture especially. Um, there's so much messaging around like what you should want in life and what's worthy of wanting, what kind of life you should expect. Um, and all of the characters, I think, are sort of getting these messages, these intrusive kind of messages, whether it's from advertising or scam texts or something or whatever. And I think for Alice, I mean, she kind of has an experience in grad school that changes her perspective and makes her think about kind of the way that her life has been shaped by these narratives that don't belong to her, right? Um, and she's searching for a way of living that's meaningful and that feels like it's her choice and sort of coming from within rather than, from without, from, these kind of, yeah, just this relentless sort of beaming of like messaging and ideas about what one should want in life. Yeah, I think part of it is trying to sort of sift through what you want and figuring out whether it's real. Yeah, I think sort of the pivotal question for me writing the book is posed at one point by Joel to his students in class, which is how do we know that we want what we think we want, right? Which to me was such a huge question working on the book. It was something that I think I thought about a lot during the pandemic for various reasons. And I think a lot of people did because they had this time away from the regular patterns of their lives and introduced doubt into a lot of people's minds about what kind of life they want, whether they actually want that, and all of these characters, I think in the book, Alice, Joel, and Emmett are all sort of arriving at these questions and anxieties post pandemic, in this sort of new world after COVID.
I think it was pandemic or not. It's an eternal question, isn't it? How do we know what we want?
Right.
I might have
Yeah.
rephrased that, but I think we sort of on the same path, are we? But yeah, but I think how do we, what do our desires tell us? What does this want really kind of want?
Mm.
And it's a challenge that's, I mean, you referenced the guy in your first book that Freud sort of went out and had a look at, and I think it's quite a stark thing for Emmett to go for, and he shouldn't, he's very welcome to have those desires, but I guess it's quite a defined idea, and
Hmm.
then he's got a vision of it, but then in his pursuit of it, it's created a lot of problems. Essentially, he's created drama, whether he likes it or not. He's created his own
Right.
drama, hasn't he? And I just find it interesting that for quite a very specific desire, I want to write a screenplay and I want it to be about this. It creates a lot of problems,
Hmm.
and it's also what I find quite compelling about it is, and this is what you did in Groundskeeping, is it's the depiction of an artist, a depiction of a writer, not in a kind of cute postmodern way. How do these books situate you in the world, and how do you see the writers within your books?
I'm always interested in, I don't know if it's writing in particular, but just in art making, and finding ways to kind of fictionalize that. I mean, the project that I'm working on now currently is about a photographer, and I've had a lot of fun sort of stepping away from writing and thinking about a different medium. Interestingly, a lot of the impulses and ethical questions are the same. Um, and for me, I think what's always been sort of perennially interesting is what obligations does a writer have to um, where they're from, to the people in their lives, how what obligations do you have when it comes to how you use your material, and who owns the material, like who has a right to write about it, and sort of the feelings of guilt or anxiety that go along with that. I like being able to take a sort of step away, or to be kind of one step abstracted or removed from fiction writing. I've found lately that I like writing about art making or artists, but I like to put some sort of twist on it so that I'm not writing so directly about exactly what I do.
Mm.
And that distance somehow gives me more freedom or leeway or something to talk about the impulses in artists and why they decide to choose certain material or work on certain projects.
No, it's interesting. Yeah, those impulses, and I think to the notes that make your character makes in groundskeeping, and he starts trying to write things, and there's obviously Alma who's a writer, and
Hmm.
how she writes about the way she's depicted about having that impulse to write about things, and then obviously Emma's got this very strong impulse to write a
Hmm.
screenplay, and just find it interesting that there are these people that you write about that are trying to write about something that is very close to them, and it's a portrayal of people trying to understand their world, I guess. And
Hmm.
it's just not it's not just a depiction of the characters in it's not just a depiction of characters who live in Kentucky. It's a depiction of people trying to also depict their world. They do that thing of okay,
Hmm.
I'm turning to this as a form or something, and
Hmm.
it's accessible in some way at least.
Yeah.
And who gets published and who gets reviews about their books is not always that's not equal. That's not an equal opportunity. But they turn to this form. Well, so next book is about photographer or photography.
Yeah, there's a photographer character in it.
Okay.
It's also set in a kind of small town Kentucky, but it's a little more true crime, I guess, or
Oh, wow.
I don't know if it's I hesitate to say that it's like fits neatly into a genre or something, but it's about sort of a series of crimes in a small town and this photographer who's doing a project and kind of ends up sort of fascinated or obsessed with these crimes and trying to figure out
Oh, wow.
how who did it and sort of what happened. But I mean, for me, it's been nice because I've sort of taken up photography as a hobby and bought, a film camera and try to
Oh,
teach
wow.
myself how to do it. And it's been really lovely actually because I it's nice to have an art hobby that I don't feel pressure to be good at. I can kind of just not be very good at it and take the camera out and take some, overexposed pictures and
Yeah,
but
there's
I
nothing like
I'm
it, is
getting better. I'm getting better. So,
I love that. I love that though. But that's kind of what your characters do, isn't it? They sort of turn to these and they go, "Oh, let's just give it a go and see what
right.
it does for me and helps me work out the world a bit." But I love photography as well, and well, I'm excited to see that.
Yeah.
Joanna Pocock, she's a photographer, and she went through. Did she go through Kentucky when she went on the Greyhound? She was my last guest, and she went through on the Greyhound bus, and she went through all of America basically on the Greyhound. But she's
Oh,
a
cool.
photographer. Well, it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to talk about your book, you as a writer, your craft. If anyone's wanting to learn how to build up an image and that balance between sort of free and direct discourse and inside and outside the writer's head, the character's head. You do well to read this book. It's yeah, just in the ordinary everyday, that kind of Updikean way, in the ordinary everyday of life, there is beauty in. Um,
Yeah, thank you.
Lee, it's been a pleasure. I've absolutely loved talking about fulfillment. I've loved talking about your first novel as well. Thanks for being so open and candid about your inspiration from home as well, because that's not always easy either. So, but for now, fulfillment is out. It's published by Faber over here in the UK. Lee Cole, thank you very much for joining me on the Rippling Pages.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a really cool conversation.